back to another episode of the Giro podcast. I hope wherever you are, you're well and you are safe. Actually, I said that on the last podcast, and I wasn't quite sure if you still say be safe. That was a bit of a COVID thing, wasn't it?
Safety never takes a day off.
And I just said it again, and I vowed when I listened to the last one not to say it, and I just said it. So
it's that inner monologue when you're editing.
Yeah, exactly. So wherever you are, I hope you're well, and we'll just leave it at that. Good.
Doing great.
As I say, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. For new time listeners, please go back and listen to some of our older podcasts. The most recent one was a really interesting one with the guys from EF Education Easy Post with Will Gerling and Owen Blandy, who are the nutritionists and the chefs. It was really fascinating insight into behind the scenes, so definitely go and give it a listen. And on to today's episode. This is a really special one. And I'm very excited to be joined by Sam Mutton from Masaka Cycling Club Elite, and also joined by co-host Jamie Olsson. Woo! Keep the swearing to a minimum, please.
Yeah, we'll
please,
be.
Jamie. Thank you very much. Well, before we get into it, we want to have a massive thank you to Afternoon Crumbs for supplying the snacks for this evening's or this afternoon's podcast. We've got some amazing, go give her a follow on Instagram if you're not already. She's got an amazing shop in Claygate and these awesome cupcakes. So, Jamie, Sam, pick your poison.
Go on, Sam, you first.
Cheers. Going to be chocolate.
Straight on the chocolate. Yeah, that was a very
Yeah.
assertive decision.
Jay?
I'll take that.
Going for the other chocolate. Oh, going for the.
I'm not
the
a chocolate
one.
man.
Oh, I'm going for the lemon.
Oh, I like the little
Peace sign.
Ukrainian flag colour one.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to get into politics on this. Sorry, I didn't say anything.
Anyway, this looks really good. So, for sort of long-time listeners, I know we've done a number of podcasts with Masaka Cycling Club, and we'll get into sort of we'll go over kind of like what it is sort of again. But Sam is the coach for the elite sort of level riders.
Yep.
And you're originally from the UK, and you're back here, and between sort of Jamie and yourself, we managed to get some time together. So firstly, Sam, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We're really, really excited to be sort of talking to you. We obviously, through Instagram and the joys of social media, we've kind of been a fan from afar.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of like a privilege to be a very small part of the Masaka journey. So to be able to sit down with you today and talk about it is really exciting.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on. Appreciate it a lot.
Oh no, honestly, it's our pleasure. Jamie and I have been really looking forward to it. So Sam, I mean, maybe let's just start with who are you and what do you do?
Who am I? Yeah, great question that is. Yeah. So I've been in Uganda since on and off since 2010, and my wife and I, we moved to Uganda in 2019, and I originally went there to set up some cycling kind of projects, not really the coaching. I kind of fell into the coaching role.
Sure.
And when I started coaching, I absolutely loved it. And so I ended up then getting in touch with Ross, doing a bit of coaching with the Masaka guys. And that's just evolved over the last few years, a year and a half or so, to kind of having MCC Elite, which is the Masaka kind of elite training program, really giving their top talent a platform to showcase how flipping good they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, they are flipping good.
Yeah, they're really fast. Kato and Wasswa, their 20-minute efforts would be 5.6, 5.7 watts per kilo. So they leave probably most of us well behind when we start climbing.
Yeah, definitely quite, that says a lot.
Yeah, they're rapid.
So, I mean, as a background, so we were sort of talking about it earlier. So we first started working with Masaka, so to speak, or not even involved with Masaka, back in probably about 2018, when Sarah from Curve Cycling, gave Ross Burridge, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times, he gave him a shout out saying that he was doing a kit collection, and we had a buttload of kit.
Mountain of kit.
And so Sarah kindly put us in contact, and we kind of sent off this kit. And he contacted me back saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so much. Thank you very much." And because we'd actually been collecting kit for about 2 years prior to that, so we had a lot.
Yeah.
And that really started the journey of actually understanding, what Ross was doing. So maybe maybe it's probably better for you to give a bit of a background of kind of like Masaka and sort of how it started, where it is, and then we can sort of talk about how you got involved.
Yeah, so I actually got involved quite late into the Masaka journey. So Ross has been kind of one of the founding patrons of the whole project and been going out to Uganda for years and years with his role with Cotton On Foundation.
Yeah.
And so actually I only got in touch with him maybe 2 years ago to help with the coaching. But even when I got in touch with him, they were kind of already in the knockings of getting their clubhouse kind of up and running.
Yeah.
And
okay.
yeah, we just reached out over the power of social media on Instagram, and was just like, how can we work together? We've both kind of got the same sort of vision at this point of like elevating Ugandan talent. And, for me, one of the things I've often said is the talent is here and the infrastructure just isn't there.
Yeah, sure.
And so it was like, right, well, I see it as kind of my challenge and life mission to help provide that infrastructure in whatever way that looks like. And the best way we could come up with was through smart training and through Zwift. You know? So I literally flew out with one pretty naff tire on turbo trainer and started using that myself. And then I put one of my friends on it. And I was like, flip, this guy's hardly ever ridden a bike and he's pushing nearly 4 watts per kilo for a 20-minute effort. I was like, he's giving me a run for my money already, albeit he is 20 kilos lighter than me. I like to put that disclaimer out there. I'm a bit of a freight train when it comes to riding, and the Ugandans aren't, annoyingly. So they're all like 55 to 60 kilos, super duper climbers. And basically we're like, hang about, all of their metrics would just be ideal for Zwift racing. Lightweight, high watts per kilo is kind of what you need to do well on Zwift. And actually, Kato and Wasswa in Uganda, they'll turn up for a race and they'll come first and second, then probably their younger brother will come third. The level of racing just isn't really there, apart from a couple of big races per year. And we're like,
that's in Uganda as a whole.
Yeah, that's in Uganda, road racing. Sorry, might get 40 riders attend a big event. And so me and Ross were just kind of looking at it and we're like, well, actually, if we can get these guys on Zwift and basically that's what we've managed to do. And now we have kind of between me and Ross collectively, so I have a clubhouse that I run in Kato in northern Kampala. Ross has the big Masaka clubhouse, which is about 2.5 hours, about 150k away in the southwest. It's kind of on the road down to Rwanda, if you know your East Africa geography at all.
Not too well.
No, it's not it doesn't come up too much in the pub quizzes, does it? So I'll let you off. But I kind of head down to their clubhouse once a month to check in on how their coach is doing, how things are going there. And me and Ross are always looking at racing schedules, looking at what are the big races going on in the world of Zwift. How can we get our Ugandan talent basically showcased as best as possible? Where are the higher points ranking races so we can get our riders up as high as possible in the ranking, kind of the Zwift power rankings if you want to get really nerdy into it, but I won't bore everyone on that now.
Well, so I mean, so if for listeners who aren't aware, please go back and listen to our other podcasts with Ross and also with Michael Delagrange from Team Armani. It really kind of, so I mean, Ross was doing a lot of work, as you say, a lot of work out in Uganda, and then got behind sort of Masaka Cycling Club that was existing. And we also did a podcast with Miru, who's the guy who really started. He's just an amazing guy. So please go back and listen or watch those podcasts. And, from us here at Giro, we've been, kind of helping to, tell the story and tell what's going on over there, and also trying to sort of create ways and means for people here in our community to help and support the community that you guys are building over there. And it has been, with the seeing the clubhouse in Masaka come to life through, sort of various donations has been incredible. Obviously, we've got a jersey on our wall here. Having people all over the world buying these jerseys is just amazing. And then obviously this last year, the last sort of 2 years, you came on the scene.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and we really will get into sort of the individual stories of some of the guys that you've been working with. But maybe let's kind of take it back a few steps. So for you personally, what's your background with regards to cycling? And essentially, how did you end up in Uganda?
Yeah, good question, actually. So, 2010 was when I first went to Uganda. And I actually wanted to cycle around Europe as my gap year. I was done with school and education. And I was, I didn't do particularly well. I kind of always say I was a standard average student, kind of C grade across the board, and didn't excel in anything apart from the sports stuff. And then that was when I kind of came alive.
The best ones. The best ones.
Yeah, exactly. All the stuff that doesn't get you a job, I could do well in them. And then anything that you needed to get employment with, I was in big trouble. And so, I wanted to cycle around Europe. And my parents were like, I think he's actually quite serious. He's going to end up getting completely lost and probably killed halfway around, So this was before the days where GPSs were really readily accessible and things like that. So this was kind of like try and read a map, but not really got a clue where I'm going. So me and my best mate wanted to do this cycle tour, basically bike pack around Europe for, 3-4 months. And my parents were like, I don't think this is not your best idea, Sam. But they could see I was getting quite serious about it. And so they were kind of like, if you do a more purposeful gap year, volunteer your time, we'll put some money in. And so they very kindly said, we'll give you £1,000 to go and do something a bit more meaningful, shall we say, in air quotes kind of points. And so we sponsored a kid in Uganda. My family sponsored a girl in an orphanage there. And I basically was like, well, that's a country I've never really been to, or I'd never been to Africa, let alone Uganda. And so just looked up volunteering opportunities and came across this organisation, and then went to Uganda basically 2010 for 6 months into 2011.
And how old were you then?
I was only 18, so this was gap year, straight out of A-levels,
Wow.
and definitely didn't want to go to university at that moment. And so, I went there and just really loved the place. You know, I met my wife. She was on the same. She's a UK lady, but we were on the same mission trip, both on our gap year, kind of trying to avoid going to university. And we just hit it off. We realised we've got very similar sort of life principles, life values, and actually just really enjoyed working with people in Uganda. Cycling was really not on the radar at this point at all. Fast forward 5 or 6 years. Cycling started to become a much bigger passion in my life, and I really enjoyed kind of the nerdy side of cycling, the numbers, training to heart rate, training to power, and was like, oh, this is, I was doing youth work actually at the time, and for a couple of churches in Reading. But cycling whenever I had a free moment, whether it was on the indoor machine or outdoors in the Chilterns, and was like, me and Chloe knew that we were heading towards the direction of probably living in Uganda, but didn't know what that was going to look like. Eventually in 2019, we managed to move to Uganda on what we call a full-time basis. And I wanted to set up cycling tours. Basically, that was the dream. That's what I wanted to do. COVID hit, and it was kind of threw everything up in the air for a lot of people. And actually, I was like, well, why am I not using other skills that I have? The youth work, the kind of the mentoring side of work, the love of numbers to do coaching, power, heart rate, and as I said earlier, we got basically one very average machine indoors. And this guy smoked me. I was like, okay, here we go. There has to be more to it than this. There has to be more talent out here than just one of my mates.
So just sort of going back a step.
Sure.
So you're the idea to sort of have like a cycle sort of touring company out there. So for somebody sort of over here who's never been to Uganda, or maybe doesn't really have an idea of kind of the type of riding, like, what is on offer over there that kind of you felt it was so special?
Yeah, I'd say, honestly, Uganda is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to. Winston Churchill, it's always the quote I give, he called it the Pearl of Africa. It's a genuinely stunning country. And I've been very blessed to travel, quite a lot around the world, but Uganda's right up there. It's kind of got everything from mountain ranges to roads through the savannas, and we were going to do road cycling basically all the way down the western side of the country. So you're on the edge of the Rift Valley, and you kind of beautiful tarmac roads. So once you get out of the city, the roads are actually quite good because they connect the major towns to the bordering countries, to Congo, to Rwanda, to Tanzania. And so we were going to do kind of a 500k in 5 days with an option to stop and do a safari midway through.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I think it was about 7,000 or 8,000 meters of climbing over that as well, and at high altitude as well.
So what's the altitude?
So the highest road we'll do is 2,450 meters above sea level. So that's
it's quite high.
It's higher than Alpe d'Huez and some of the more famous climbs in Europe. I think just below the Stelvio, off the top of my head, that is. But you're struggling.
Sounds about right. Yeah,
it's you're puffing away.
And then privileged to go to Lesotho. Back in 2018, 19. And we went up into Lesotho and then up to Black Mountain. That was 3-2.
Yeah.
And it was like,
it's like breathing through a straw, isn't it? It's a nightmare.
It got real. Jesse,
seeing things.
Jesse got me through that day. That was a tough one.
I can imagine. No, but the whole country's at quite high altitude. Kampala's 1,200 meters above sea level.
Wow.
So you just, on a really big F1 machine, you can just start to feel. Well, this is my excuse anyway. I think I can feel something going wrong. I'm not sure a sports scientist would agree with that, but in my head, there's an excuse for losing a couple of percent off the max sprint and things like that.
Absolutely.
So,
So you and your wife sort of base yourselves out there, and then you have this trainer, you get this guy on there. So what was the connection point? When did you choose to reach out to Masaka and Ross? And how did that story entail, for you getting involved and starting to train a couple of the guys? Yeah,
sure. So, like, as I say, me and Chloe ran our own charity, which is primarily based around youth work and mentoring within the slum communities in Kampala. And so initially, I was going to take guys and girls from different communities and put them on indoor machines and train them up. And then for whatever reason, that just wasn't quite working and going to plan how we thought, whether it was me trying to suppress my passions on a community that didn't necessarily want it or what, there's a few issues and errors that I made. And we looked around, and I reached out to Ross when we were back in one of our many lockdowns a few years ago. I think it was end of 2020, basically.
Okay.
I sent him a message on Instagram. I was like, look, I see your clubhouse is coming along. It looks amazing. I've got 1 Tyron turbo trainer and now 2 direct drive turbo. I'm taking out 2 more direct drive turbos.
Yeah.
Like, do you want me to have a go on some of your riders, and let's see what they can actually do, you know? And what was really interesting is actually the concept of training to power and training to heart rate is completely new to Ugandans. Nobody owns a power meter in the whole country. You know, we're the only club or clubs that have them. Yeah. And so, you know, to do that, we had to do like a load of physics lessons with the riders, explaining what is power. You know, every time you push down on a pedal stroke, you're generating a force, and explaining all of this sort of kind of concepts to them, explaining that a little strap around your chest will show me how hard you are probably exerting yourself or not exerting, and can help me look at how fatigued you may or may not be. And so we just came in, you know, I've done no coaching in my life at all. I just quite like the numbers and things like that. But suddenly we've gone from kind of like a very average knowledge base in the UK, should we say, to kind of being like industry leaders almost, you know, kind of the head of cycle coaching. And, you know, suddenly people in the national setup are getting quite excited because they're like, flip, these guys have got way more than anyone else, you know.
The national setup in Uganda.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go into that one now. But the national setup were quite interested, or still are very interested in kind of what we're doing in and around these indoor machines. Because we're still the only team that has them. And I think between me and Ross, we've probably got about 10 machines now. Kind of most of them are in the Masaka clubhouse. Then I do a bit of the kind of fitness testing and coaching at our place in Kampala. So, I mean, that's really interesting. So, I mean, for us here in the UK, cycling's becoming a very, very big sport. The barriers to entry aren't too high. Obviously, you need to buy a bike, and then you buy a better bike, and then you buy a better bike, and then you buy, turbo. But the sort of, the way to get into cycling is quite straightforward, in that you go to a bike shop and you buy a bike, and that's kind of step one, and then you buy sort of pedals and all that. So, obviously, maybe talk about from your standpoint, what it is like for somebody who's interested in getting into cycling. Because we're seeing, the training you're doing with the twins, and, kind of their race levels and what they're doing on Zwift, and, they are crushing it. Yeah. But there's obviously quite a backstory there for them to get to that point. And, with you and Masaka, you obviously have invested into them. But for somebody who's kind of maybe seeing what they're doing and wants to get into it, like, that's a very different journey to what we're used to over here. Yeah. So what in real terms, like, what does that really look like? What's that story? Yeah, it's really interesting kind of question. And like, there's so many different cultural challenges around cycling in Uganda. I'll start by saying, like, one of the big ones is that cycling is seen as a poor person's way of moving around. They'll get a very heavy single speed bike, kind of 46, 14, and it just messes with your knees. And it's probably 20 to 25 kilos. And that's just a workhorse steel bike. It's designed for moving. We got these jerry cans of water. Yeah. It's designed for moving up to like 100 litres or 100 kilos of water. And then the guy will just push this thing up a hill. Wow. It's not a bike for leisure or recreation like we do, or cycle to work, or even things like cycle to work schemes. There's just not a culture of cycling being like a leisure activity, should we say, in Uganda, or certainly definitely not a way of making a living or an income. It's completely the opposite of that, shall we say. And so that's a huge challenge straight away. Is we've now got to look at cultural mindsets, which is, so hard for us in the UK to get our heads around this kind of concept of hang about just being seen on a bike is seen as perhaps being lower down in society, you know. Sure. And so that's a massive challenge to start with. And then the accessibility of it. We have a couple of bike shops in Uganda, but nothing massive. You don't have like a big decathlon that you can walk in and pick up budget parts and budget components to fix your bike, And so even I still when I'm doing mechanics on bikes, I get a lot more nervous in Uganda, because I'm like, if I get this wrong and break this, I'm going to have to wait 3 or 4 weeks and pay twice the price, because I have to ship that part over from England. So it gets really frustrating as well. So you don't dare tinker as much, and then you have to pay a mechanic in Uganda probably 3 or 4 times the price you would expect to pay for that kind of service. And so those are, some of the challenges that we face. But also, like, the Ugandans, because it's so hard to access parts, they will just ride their bikes until they fall apart, So like if we start hearing our bottom brackets creaking, right, we'll take it in, get the bottom brackets serviced, maybe change the bearings.
Yeah.
The Ugandan will probably just keep riding until it just seizes or just completely gives up, and just completely different ways of approaching things. Around getting ladies on bikes as well. We've got Florence, one of the best female riders in the country in Masaka, who's a sister of Kato and Wasswa. Yeah. Just a very, very fast family. It's ridiculous.
Got it in the genes.
Yeah, exactly. But just cultural presuppositions there about getting female riders on bikes. It's just not done. There's a lot of things around, there's a cultural challenge around. A lot of people think that a woman will lose her virginity if she rides a bike and things like that, and so it's very kind of frowned upon.
Ross was saying in one of our last podcasts that even when girls turn like 11, they stop going to school, as in like they're kind of essentially sometimes married off, and that's for us, we can look at that and go, oh my, can't do that. But that's just the culture there.
It doesn't make it right, but it is sadly quite often what happens, and particularly with these guys in Masaka, it's one of the poorest regions in the country, so actually school is something you have to pay for. It is a necessity, but it isn't always affordable. It's not an affordable necessity for so many of these, so for Kato and Wasswa, their parents couldn't afford to pay for both of them to school, so they kind of had to choose which kid they sent to school. And you just imagine that if you've got kids, like having to decide who is my smarter child, who has more potential in an academic perspective. Both of them only finished primary school. I think Wasswa dropped out in P3, which is about year 3 in English schooling, and just went on his bike, and he's like, well, I can make some money through cycling, and Kato runs a mechanic.
So he can make some money through cycling. So
like local races. So we get like those local village races where everyone races those local bikes that I was referring to.
Oh, wow.
Now that's quite a scene to behold, because they will thrash these things around.
I think I've seen the videos on the Masaka Instagram.
Yeah.
It is wild. And the celebrations of the winners.
Oh, it's carnage,
all the mopeds following them.
It's really
like
dangerous.
Giant dust cloud. Just ragging around the village. It's crazy.
And so many of these races are fixed as well, so probably the one you saw of Kato getting picked up above everybody. I was at that race.
Oh, amazing.
It was meant to be a 75 kilometer race. The boys ended up doing 145 kilometers because they sent them on extra detours, and they knew Kato and Wasswa were going to absolutely kind of like clean up here.
So they gave them a different route?
Yeah, basically they just added bits onto this race. So we're doing we're meant to be doing 3 laps of this course, and they ended up doing 6.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just madness, it was like, it was the first local race I'd been to. They're racing there.
And this was down in Masaka?
Where was it? No, it was more towards my side, actually,
fine.
kind of in between the two, kind of more Kampala central region area. And it was just incredible to see these guys and their determination to win. I think the winning prize was about £40, which, for us is not a lot of money. I would just get off my bike if I've been told to ride more and you're going to win 40 quid. But, it was just chaos. And basically, Kato finished first with this other lad who they'd been the local lad that they'd tried to make win. And thankfully, the community rallied behind and realised Kato. I said to them, no one's going to beat Kato. In this field, I know the riders. No one is as strong as Kato or nowhere near. Wass was the only person that could beat Kato in this race. And so when he finished alongside this other guy, I knew straight away something fishy had happened.
Okay.
Thankfully, he'd got the Wahoo GPS. So I was like, right, give me that. And we talked to the race organizer and say, look how far he's ridden. So we kind of had a little bit of evidence. Yeah, he's done double and still probably twice as quick as I could have done it.
Shout out to Wahoo.
Yeah, Wahoo fighting corruption in East
saving
Africa.
the day,
So, they actually did donate a few of their nice roams to Masaka, which is
amazing.
Fair play to Wahoo there. But the community basically just pulled him off his bike and threw him up on their heads. And I was like, I've got to get the camera out there. It was absolute scenes.
Great video.
Is that
one of my favourite days.
your Instagram account, or is that on the Masaka?
Probably both. Yeah.
Okay,
so I was the one recording Kato getting lobbed around.
Well, if you're on Instagram, jump on MCC Elite and have a little scroll through and find it. It's well worth a watch.
We'll put all the links
good
below.
fun.
It's
great. It's an incredible video.
Yeah, it's class.
I mean, that's, and on that sort of Instagram note, we started working with Ross, a few years ago, and to see the sort of the growth in Masaka has been amazing, and the support. You just mentioned that Wahoo I mean, if you were to sell Ross, 3-4 years ago, that in a few years' time, Wahoo are going to be sending out, roams and equipment, and people are donating bikes, like all of this stuff, it's amazing. And I suppose, like, whenever I speak with Ross, our kind of goal, and I was saying to you earlier before we started recording, like, we really want to get across how people can be a part of the story and support it. And, for Wahoo to send a few roams out, it's for a business of that scale, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But for the individuals that are receiving it over there, and for the work that you're doing, and the barriers that you're having to overcome, those small donations are massive. And the trickle down effect,
the
the
ripple effect of that,
it's so powerful.
It inspires and empowers the next generation.
Yeah.
And I know that's like Ross is very passionate about that. That's if you find the best way to put these clearly talented riders like Kato and Wasswa on like a platform to sort of do their thing.
Yeah.
It's not only helping them and helping their family and their community, it's also inspiring a younger generation, which then has this ripple effect out into sort of other parts of the community. And, you sort of build out through this sort of inspiration sort of effect.
And that's it, is trying to grow that grassroots level. We're at the start when we were talking about people riding, seeing it as a poor man's or poor woman's mode of transport. It's like, can we change that cultural narrative to be...
make these guys heroes.
And if you can create heroes, you're going to. That's what's happened in the running. You got Joshua Chep, the guy. 5,000 meter god almost now. He doesn't have to lift a finger in Uganda. He gets driven around everywhere and gets loads of money from all sorts of sponsors. If we can do that with one cyclist, what that could do for genuinely, not to exaggerate it, a nation or even a region of East Africa could be. It's hard to know where it would go, but I think it could completely explode the sport.
And the story of like somebody like Florence as well, and that's, I mean, just on that note around the running sort of, like parallel, the podcast that we did with Michael, that's something that he's very passionate about, understanding, like, we've seen it in, these East African countries with the running, like we can, the goal is to see, kind of people from, sort of Uganda or like Masaka get into the pro peloton. Yeah. And exactly to say, because the impact that has on a national level as well as a local level is significant.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And it's through a sport. Look, we are used to seeing, when we grow up, we're used to seeing, kind of, sort of men and women on bikes, as, and making money from it and something that they love, but for that's
just
such a
here at the weekend.
That's such a foreign thing for, what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's why, you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
To
definitely.
try and see that kind of, tidal change within the culture and communities there.
Absolutely, yeah. And then alongside that, you're fighting kind of what we're talking about, the corruption, the systemic corruption within Uganda, which it comes from the very top, sadly, and then it comes through the National Council of Sport and then into our cycling federation, so you've got...
Are you at liberty to, sort of...
I can talk about it very freely. Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem talking about all of that. So, you've got the National Council of Sport, which is the overarching body for sports. That's the government body that looks out, in theory, looks out for sport in the country. And then you've got the UCA, which is the Ugandan Cycling Association, which is kind of like British cycling here. They're the ones that look at the national talent and are meant to represent the cyclists of the country, and it's... I don't want to be rude and I don't want to look like I'm just coming out of nowhere, but they're just very incompetent, and I can give hundreds of examples of that as well. The fact that they're very, very few national races. We don't have a national calendar, so it's very hard to give cyclists stuff to train for. If we get the national calendar, or the national championship, it will only be road cycling at the minute. We only have a national championship for road cycling for men and maybe for women if we're lucky for the girls. And, they might give you a month's notice for the race, which anyone that knows anything about cycling, you need a bit more than a month to train for a big race.
I think most races here are sold out entries before a month.
Exactly.
Before a month out. So, there's a sort of bit of perspective. Yeah,
so you kind of want a 12-month build-up.
Yeah.
You should know 12 to 18 months
for an A race,
ideally, for your... in theory, biggest race of the year as a country, and we'll get maybe a month's notice. So actually the likes of Kato and Wasswa, now they've got these pro contracts. They might not even be in the country when we get told that this event is happening, so it suddenly becomes a logistical nightmare, and you just got to hope they're in some sort of form and not in an off season and things like that. So that's just one very small example. But you go to other races and we've got these motorbikes that you're referring to on the video. What you'll find is guys will pay these drivers to basically draft them all the way around the course. So if I make a breakaway, as soon as I get outside of the peloton, my mate will come, I'll sit behind him and I'll draft behind him, or even worse, they'll just hold on to the back of them.
I've heard this is what Danny does.
I've done that a few times.
Danny does this around local races.
It's a good way to get a few Strava segments. So it's like motorized pacing, but in a race, if that makes sense.
Wow.
So not only is it just stupidly dangerous, because our roads are not closed for racing, like national events in here will probably be on closed roads most of the time in UK and Europe. And so you've got these races where you've got heaps of traffic and you've then got Ugandan guys who are desperate to make it, so they'll be holding onto the back of the motorbike to try and win. And so how do you compete with that?
That's a DQ in a UCI race. If you're watching one of the classics at the weekend and you see someone drafting a camera bike, if they do it for too long, they're out the race. Same with the team cars. It's only when
sticky bottom.
Yeah, it's only when you're needed. There's loopholes, but no one's hanging onto the back of a motorbike for the whole race.
And it's not even particularly hidden. It's quite obvious. So we'll try and capture it on camera if we can, but it's so hard to capture it when it's a 120k race.
And I suppose your sort of desire and goal is to the guys you're working with to essentially set their sights higher.
Yeah. So one of our strategies is actually almost to bypass national racing, and it's a really hard conversation because I'm not Ugandan, so I don't know what their life aims and wants are, but we've had many conversations around it. And actually the boys are quite good at kind of understanding that perhaps being national champion isn't the be all and end all, or competing in the Olympics isn't the be all and end all, or the Commonwealth Games. Originally that's all they wanted to do was to race in the Olympics or get to the Tour de France. And actually we've had so many heartbreaking long conversations about actually, sadly, Kato, Wasswa, we're never going to get to the Olympics under the current infrastructure we have in the country, because if anyone goes there, it'll be the guys that can pay for their airfare and their ticket, and that's something me and Ross just point blank really try and refuse to do. You want to get there on merit, and I am trying to work with the National Federation, not to just talk badly about them. I've offered to help with national selection by using our indoor machines, putting riders through like a 4DP test on Wahoo system, and saying, well, this guy's got a massive max sprint, he's kind of your sprinter if we've got a sprinting course. But if it's a climbing course, then Kato and Wasswa are probably some of the best climbers in the country, alongside maybe a couple of other lads.
It's interesting you say that, because I imagine as most people listening to this podcast could probably select a national team on a similar basis, like you've just said, he's good at sprinting, it's a flat course, let's take him. Most of our listeners could do that, that isn't what the Ugandan Cycling Association are doing.
No, exactly. They all just pick. There's a few clubs that are intertwined with the president of the UCA. He's the top guy. And actually, it's just really messy, basically. They kind of all just look out for each other. The problem is it's never just one corrupt person, and that's the challenge. It's kind of a network of corrupt people. And that's where the issues lie. That's where the challenges lie. Is actually, even if a lot of people are like, we just need a new president, and I'm like, well, then what? What's the strategy if we get rid of the cycling
Someone
president?
Will just get in his ear and
so it'll be the next person in, and then it'll be the other corrupt teams around that will then just maintain the control and the equilibrium, and we'll be no better off. We've just got a new person in charge who's still just a puppet on a string, and so it's just continuous challenges, but actually. Kato, Wasswa, Florence, are amazing. All three of them now got pro contracts with the Amani project, and
so let's obviously that I think that's a pretty good background as to kind of where you obviously got involved with Masaka, and hopefully for listeners, good overview as to kind of the landscape, so to speak. So obviously, let's talk about MCC Elite. Let's talk about this team. Let's talk about kind of the work that you're doing with these riders. Because you said you started with like a small sort of training camp in your house.
Yes. Yeah. So when me and Ross first spoke, I offered to take, I think 5 riders at my house. We'd got some spare room basically. So I said they can come and stay with me and my wife and child, and I'll put them through their paces on a few different fitness tests. It was just on Zwift at the time, because I had one iPad there, and like 1 or 2 turbo trainers. So it's kind of like, I think one was connected to my phone and one was connected to like the iPad mini, and that's all I could do at that time, but I knew that we'd be getting at least accurate metrics to start with. And so we did the weekend, and it was okay. We got some interesting results from the riders, and then I think 2 weeks later, Ross sent me another batch of riders, did the same sort of concept. So we had then a little bit of an overview of who are meant to be our strongest riders, which unsurprisingly was Kato and Wasswa. But then there was also a couple of really strong, I think they're 17, maybe 18-year-olds now. Young lad called Davis. I don't know if you've ever seen him. He, if I go on a slight tangent, if we're going to see someone make it big into pro peloton, I would put my money on him.
Yeah,
you know,
really.
he speaks fantastic English, quite, can I say, well educated. You know, he's finishing his secondary education, which for a guy from Masaka that's a real big achievement.
Wow.
You know,
whilst also maintaining
5.3 watts per kilo for a 20-minute effort. You know, so
mental. Not just your average
17,
school
18.
kid. That
Exactly.
That is,
And how old is he now?
I think he's 17, maybe just turned 18.
Wow.
So he's in that 17, 18. But again, like, you know, going back to what we're saying, you know, not being able to get picked up by an
not having
organisation or
that
a
fair
team.
platform to show that off on.
Yeah, he'd be scooped up by maybe not British cycling in the UK, but he'd be in a team racing every week and getting just such a great knowledge base. Whereas the best we can do for him is stick him on Zwift and race some of the best riders in the world on that esports platform and see where that takes us.
That gives him his fairest platform you can sort of guide him towards, I guess. And it is a very good way of showing what they're capable of, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That those numbers don't lie.
No, they don't lie at all. And I think, as you rightly say, it's the best way we can get them to race. You know, unfortunately, even with Zwift and things like that, there's challenges with that. You know, we missed out on, there was the Zwift World Championships just recently, and there was the qualification event. But sadly, they
dual recording.
Yeah, there was the dual recording, which was a real headache for us. You know, because we've not only got to get a bike that's probably kitted out with Shimano 105, we've got to get a turbo trainer, and now we need a head unit, and now we need a secondary power meter. You know, and that's a lot of money. You know, that's £2,000-3,000 worth of kit. And they only gave us a month's notice for the qualifying events, and so if I ship stuff out immediately to Uganda, the best it's going to get there is 2.5 to 3 weeks. But I had to find £500 twice for 2 power meters, and it was gutting. They came 3 days after the race, and so the race happened. I looked at who came in the top 5, which was a qualification position, and we'd beaten these guys several times, a few South African lads, and it just killed me. You know, it's absolutely brutal.
But I
so
suppose
we've learned the lesson.
I mean, and that's, you know, the really great, you know, kind of avenue that Swift and sort of other platforms have allowed. It's these guys, you know, the opportunity to race high-level people all over the world. And to get results. I mean, what that's got to do to boost confidence, you know, and just to kind of set that tone. And, you know, now, you know, we can reference sort of Armani, you know, they've got 3 contracts in Masaka. I mean, what's the goal there? You know, what's the goal for Armani, you know, with offering contracts to the brothers and sister? What's the goal? What's the goal for them?
They're harnessing the best East African talent, basically. They are not interested in the national federations. Maybe I dare say as far as the UCI, you know, they're not interested in kind of the bureaucracy with cycling. It's very much about giving the best talent in East Africa good money, a good salary, a living, so they don't have to worry about anything else, and giving them an opportunity to race around the world, you know. So they've got riders going off to America for Steamboat gravel race in the summer. Kato and Wasswa, all things being equal, should be going to North Spain, Catalonia for a couple of big gravel races in April. These boys had never left the country apart from to go to Kenya. So for them to go to Spain, that's a real pride thing as well. You know, they're going to come back international travellers. They've flown once. You know, they've flown once on a tiny plane with me up to North Uganda for a holiday someone paid for our team, which was just incredible to see these boys on a plane and kind of like something we just jump on and put the headphones on and off we go. You know, these guys were looking out the window, and to broaden their horizons, you know, like Wasswa raced in the migration gravel race, came 9th, and I remember it was one of the most beautiful conversations I had with him. You know, he's got very broken English, and I've got very broken Luganda, which is the local language they speak. And he was like, Sam, I saw an elephant for the first time. And I'm like, we have hundreds of elephants in Uganda, but he's never had the opportunity to travel. And he's like, I saw an elephant, I saw a giraffe, and he was like a school kid wanting to tell me all these animals that he'd seen, and it just
nothing to do with the 9th place.
The 9th, he obviously was chuffed about that, but then it was like, and all of this, you know, and it was just a beautiful moment of like, flip. How have they not seen this? You know, like we just a different cultural mindset of like I grew up in a family that wanted to travel and was blessed with the money to be able to do that. But, these guys don't even travel 4 hours down the road to a safari park, because that's a waste of money in their mind. They'd rather think about saving money or putting a nice meal on the table. And that's just... Amani, sorry, it's a very long answer. Amani is basically looking at how can we broaden these guys' horizons and use the gravel scene as almost a backdoor into the pro peloton, So there's guys going to Cape Epic, I think is it March? It's March now, isn't it?
It's meant to be March, but because of COVID last year, it was late. It's been pushed to October the last 2 years. God knows what they'll be doing with it this year.
Whenever Cape Epic's on, there's a few riders going down there.
It's a huge field, isn't it?
That's a massive elite field. That's mountain bike racing, so I would say maybe not quite their forte, but they're going to really use things like the Steamboat gravel race and a few other big ones in the States in the summer to see how good they are against the likes of Ian Boswell, Lawrence Tendam, who actually did the migration gravel race and got pushed close.
The migration gravel race was amazing. Obviously, organised by Michael and Armani, and it brought some of the best sort of riders, some pro peloton, some professional gravel riders, which is pretty mad. We've got these professional gravel riders now. Just go what's changing, and we're looking on it as fans of cycling, as fans of racing, seeing these big names, looking at the parkour, going, what a place to do it. And here we've got, your man finishing ninth, and we'd be stoked on the ninth, and he's talking about the experience that he's had.
He was wired.
What a gorgeous, kind of like metaphor for what we're dealing with here. We're not, even though the cycling is the vessel and it is the avenue by which, these opportunities are presented for him, our references are so different to his. And
he just
actually,
had a cracking day on the bike.
His love for the bike and the support that Masaka have given him and then in turn Armani have given him have opened up this new life that he would never have had before. That's just so powerful and something that, like, for all listeners out there, like, we cannot take that for granted. Like, the small support that we give, like, it's not just about the bike. It's not
so
just about. It's really significant. Really significant.
Absolutely. I think Ross says it so well. I've heard a few of his podcasts that he talks on, and he'll say first and foremost, Masaka Cycling Club is a humanitarian project. And that sounds like a weird thing to say when you're talking about cycling, but then when you start to see the results and see that Wasswa was just as happy to have seen an elephant and a giraffe and go to Kenya as he was to have finished ninth. And maybe he didn't fully understand what the impact of finishing ninth would have meant, but
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. The guy got an opportunity to see the world, which he wouldn't have done without cycling, and that's the humanitarian part. And now he's on £200 a month, which again doesn't sound like a lot, but he was earning £1 a day, so that's £30 a month if he worked every day. He's now on £200 a month or so with Amani, which is huge money for a guy from Masaka Cycling.
And it allows him the freedom to train in something that he loves.
He can train every day. Better. Yeah, exactly. He should only now improve. He can now have good nutrition rather than just rice and beans and basic things. And I'm really not trying to be dramatic. This is the genuine challenges that these guys face.
Well, I mean, according to the podcast we did with EF, he'll get to the Tour de France and he'll just eat rice anyway. So
this is it. The plant-based diet.
He's just training himself up. He's training himself up for the World Tour diet. According to Owen.
Carbs. And again, that's the other really interesting thing we have. I mean, in all the conversations we've had around Masaka, like we've just talked about the training and the coaching that you're doing, but obviously there's the nutrition aspect as well, because we're not dealing with keen amateurs. We're dealing with now, I mean, he's paid to race professional riders that are racing at an elite level. So I mean, where does that come into play? How do they access sort of like good nutrition?
Yeah, that is a much harder one, because it is linked to income. Ultimately, they can't afford to buy energy gels. There's nowhere to buy them. First and foremost, actually. But even like an energy bar, particularly if it's shipped into Uganda, like Uganda has 40% import tax. So anything that's coming in almost is twice the price as what you'd pay in Tesco's for it. So that makes a massive problem. So we look at. I've taught them a few recipes how to make their own like flapjack and oat-based food, which is still buying oats. It's like £3 a packet, which if you're earning £1 a day, there's no way you're going to spend £3 on a load of oats. So they've neglected nutrition for a long time, and this is going to be a challenge. I think it's not going to change overnight. That mindset of you need to eat well to perform well, because they're like, well, we perform well already, Sam. Like we're good. So I really need to eat this expensive food to do better.
I mean, that in itself is interesting. It's if that's what they can do with that attitude without you even touching that side of things. Imagine, as they continue to progress and like this new talent comes through and gets to progress into these sort of maybe these European pro outfits where suddenly that will all be taken care of.
Yeah, exactly.
God knows what they could do.
Yeah, it's quite terrifying to think, the likes of this young lad Davis and people like that, you think, where could he end up? Because he is seeing what Kato and Wasswa are doing, seeing that they're earning good money, and he's like, well, I want to have a go at that. And this is what we're saying about making heroes, the Joshua Cheptegei kind of analogy of like, if Kato and Wasswa and Florence can be pioneers for East African cycling through the Amani program, and there's 2 other Ugandans as well that have got contracts, so it's 5 Ugandans in a pro setup. If these guys can show and light up a path for these other riders, then that's when we can start changing that cultural narrative and that grassroots level of cycling, and build a culture of cycling, which currently I think the country could really do with.
Yeah, that's amazing. So for you, obviously you're kind of essentially, head coach of the Masaka Cycling Club, in their elite program. What's for you on a, not only with maybe the goal for Masaka widely, but for you on a personal level, like what's the goal? Like what would you love, in 5 years' time to look back and say, look what we've achieved? Like for you, what is that?
Yeah, I think what keeps me going is first and foremost seeing the short-term impact. The Katos, the Wasswas getting these contracts. And that's a great start, but that for me isn't what I would see as enough. Enough change. I try and stay away from the politics of cycling as much as I can, but you just hit a glass ceiling. You have to take it on at certain points, and you have to really choose your battles. If we say 5 years' time, I'd love to still be in Uganda. I love living out there. That's my wife and my daughter's home. I would love to be in a point that if I step back, everything will just continue as it was, and leave a legacy, basically. That helps grow the sport at a grassroots level, but also we have the potential to host like international racing or national racing. And I spoke to you guys earlier about this. We've got this big land project. We've got 100 acres of land, basically, which is, there's a lot of land. If you walk the boundary, it's about 3 kilometers. It's this huge plot of land that we are going to be building the first ever mountain bike park in Uganda on, which, again, trying to show people that this can be a leisure activity, this can be a sport, and then you can convert that into a way to cycle to work, to save money. And actually Uganda, just on an aside, Kampala is like 4 times more polluted than what the World Health Organization would recognize a highly polluted city to be at, just to give you a rough feeling for how bad it is. So can we start to create a more eco-friendly country, city, town?
Is there... forget on like a national or like a governmental level, if that's a word. Is there appetite for that? Kind of amongst sort of people, is there that understanding of actually we need to make some changes here because living at 4 times a polluted level is not okay?
Yeah, there is just not enough. There's small voices at the moment. There are organisations doing some amazing things. But there's not enough desire. At probably the higher policy making level. There's, I guess the argument would be there are greater concerns. There are people in absolute deprivation. So why am I worried about how clean the air is? And it is a really tricky balance. If you've got people who are genuinely struggling to find food, that's a higher importance than the air you breathe. But it also isn't. It's a really tricky one. So
priorities.
Exactly, and it's such a. Again, we're coming back to that humanitarian kind of position. Can we keep using cycling as a humanitarian aid and goal? And so, we hope through this land that we can create jobs, maybe 30 or 40 people employed as bike mechanics, as coaches, So my dream would be to build up a small army of Ugandan high quality coaches that understand power, weight, heart rate, training loads, things like that. Things that most recreational cyclists in the UK just
take
do
for granted
because we've been on Zwift for 5-6 years, whereas this is cutting edge out there. And so can we train up mechanics that have nice high quality park tool, training sets and things like that, and they can make a living from that, and a good living, not just £1 a day, but actually like, not just survival but thriving, not survive but thrive sort of kind of concept. And so for me, answering the previous question, it's about creating that legacy. That means cycling can continue without me being there, and it would continue anyway, but actually to a point where people really want to be involved in that sport, and we can actually, maybe then we can start changing things on a higher policy level, because there's a greater demand and a greater desire, for things.
Well, I mean, you're, obviously with your background and, your position as a coach, you're automatically taking that mentoring role, as in you're doing it to further the potential of these individuals that you're working with. And obviously at the minute, there's a handful that have, been presented contracts. And, we hope that continues, and that, there are other people that take on that mantle to mentor, new potential, riders, and see that avenue into not only something that's, fulfilling, but also something that is a career, and something absolutely. That, can really set an example.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the dream, is to see riders seeing cycling as a way to make money. There's a few options for cycling tour guides. And so with, one of my favorite success stories of a friend of mine in Uganda, Rafa, when I first met him, he spoke a little bit of English, and that was about it. And actually I helped him with like this savings program, and he got his driving license, and he knew how to ride a bike. This is the lad that actually went on the turbo trainer and did really, really well.
Okay.
He ended up getting a part-time job, basically doing tour guiding, and kind of like, if he did 10 days of that, he would earn 2 months' pay in 10 days of tour guiding. And it was just like completely blew both our minds, actually, that he could make as much money as he did through it. And he went with a friend of mine who runs some mountain bike tours, and 10 days work, he'd made 600,000 shillings or something like that, which is £150 or something. So he was able to take his family out for a nice dinner, and you just do things he wouldn't normally be able to do, and that was just like such a success. And you're like, can we now multiply that tenfold, hundredfold, to a point where people see Uganda as a cycling destination? We're a long, long way from that, but the potential is 100% there for some great gravel riding, some great road riding, and can we see that happening on a much larger scale? Can we make 100 RAFOs? Yeah.
So on that note, how, for listeners who maybe haven't been aware of Masaka, as a business, we have been supporting Masaka, not only sort of financially, but also trying to raise awareness, and also trying to create and work with Ross of avenues of how we can support, been involved in the Jersey drives, and with the goal, Ross has been very clear, that the monthly donations are a massive thing. Yeah. And we're not talking about lots of money. We're talking about as little as like £1, or Ross's thing was, the price of a cup of coffee a month, which is nothing. And so, we honour that. So we donate sort of X amount, per month as well.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is amazing. And talking about it, it reaffirms why we support this, because it's not for the hype. It's not for the show or the spectacle of it. It is having the work that you're doing, and the work that Masaka's doing, is having a real impact in the lives of individuals who wouldn't have had that. And the fact that it is part of, we're using the bike, something that we all love, to champion that is something that is very humbling to be a part of. How can listeners support and be involved in this? What is the best way from your standpoint for people to kind of say, this sounds amazing, how can I help?
I think there's loads of different ways. Obviously the monetary giving is super helpful, particularly the monthly donations, because it just allows Ross to create a clear budget, and things like that. But monetary giving aside, I think there's loads of other ways. Equipment is such a challenge in Uganda, as we alluded to earlier. There isn't those big mega stores where we can just go buy our new Shimano chain because it's rusted or snapped or far too stretched, which, the power these guys are putting through the chains, we get through them pretty quickly. So those kind of consumable parts, maybe people, when they go buy their 10-speed chain, might want to buy a second one, and then actually give it to us, and we can get it shipped out to Uganda. Consumable, any consumable parts. Bottom bracket is a bit of a fiddly one, so we'll leave that aside. But tires, tubes, chains, cassettes, anything Shimano basically is super, super helpful.
You were saying, tubes.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get tubes out there, and you've got guys that are like, you know, running on like repaired after repaired after repaired tubes.
Yeah, so if you took most of the boys' bikes apart or Florence's bikes apart, I guarantee you'll probably see 4 or 5 patches on a tube. You know, running tubeless just isn't really an option because it's just quite expensive to get. Sure. Once you get going with it, it's a good option, but. You know,
new rims, new
rims,
tires,
new tape, probably a compression pump ideally. You know, you can spend a few £100 just to get that going. And so, whilst the money isn't there to inject that capital into it, you know, we just go with the standard 700 by 25 and then an inner tube, and that works for now. You know, longer term, that's something we'll try and look into. But you know, a few spare inner tubes is a couple of quid, isn't it? You know, it's not a lot of money. You know. Helping sponsor Zwift accounts, you know, perhaps if you pay your $12.99, if you feel like you can double it, you know, sponsor a Ugandan Zwift account as well, you know, things like that. Another one that's we don't talk about a lot, but is really good. A lot of the guys are really trying to get onto Instagram and social media to learn to market themselves. You know, you might have seen Kato and Wasswa and these guys.
We follow all 3 of the siblings.
There you go, fantastic.
We follow all 3 of them on Instagram now. I think in the post last week, we tagged all 3 of them. Yeah. So you can go back and find that and give them all a follow if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow them, but comment as well.
Yeah.
Because actually what I've done before is before they had their accounts, I would write stuff as MCC Elite, and then I would read the comments out to them, and I'd be like, oh, you got this person in England saying, go on Kato, smash the race, or go on Florence, you're an amazing girl. Yeah. And genuinely, you'd see their face light up. Like they absolutely loved that engagement. You know, and you know, bless them, Wasswa can't really read English, so I have to read those comments out to him, and he gets a lot of help with his Instagram. But it really truly does lift their spirit, and you can see it. You know, they get on to Zwift and they just want to attack from the gun, which I'm also then trying to tell them to calm down and pace themselves.
It's so exciting to watch as well. Like you see these guys kind of in the clubhouse going like hell for leather. Like it's just amazing. It's
ridiculous. You know, they'll go off the gun at 400 watts the first 2-3 minutes. And I'm like, please just slow down. I'm looking at the heart rate and it's just going up. I'm like, we need to bring this down, otherwise you're going to go pop. And Wasswa, we call him the smiling assassin. You know, he'll be putting out huge numbers that most of us can dare dream about, and he'll be just sat there grinning, you know. What's wrong with you, man?
No, I know a few listeners that have ended up in races with them on Zwift and instantly regretted it. But you know, at the same time, it's amazing. You know, they pick up the name, they see Masaka, they text me like, oh yeah, just race Kato. He's absolutely, you know, destroyed me. Yeah, these guys are good, and like it's cool how it's become this like recognizable name, you know, when we've got listeners who've listened to the previous podcast going, oh yeah, I raced with them on Zwift, or one went hooning past me in Worldtopia. It's quite cool.
That was probably me.
Yeah.
No, it is incredible, and actually, like, you know, I think they've now done 100 races, but I remember when we first started the Zwift racing, you know, they, bless them, they got it, but they didn't get it at the same time. You know, it's a weird, it's like a nuance. It's like a bit of, it is exactly. It's like a funny criterium. You start fast, it kind of calms down, and then it generally ends up in a bunch finish, you know, 80% of the time. And they weren't quite getting it because they'd raced in Uganda, and this was one of the problems we were alluding to earlier, is they just attack from the gun because they can get away with that in Uganda. You know, they just blow the field apart within 2K, and then Kato and Wasswa will just be their own breakaway and never get caught. And so they thought they could do that in an ACAT race. And we are really having to work hard on being like, you know, calm it down, boys, bring it in. And we're getting quite close. We had a few near misses, and then eventually Wasswa, unsurprisingly, ends up in a breakaway with this one other Dutch guy. And I'm looking on Zwift Power. I do all the nerdy stuff behind the scenes as they're racing, you know, trying to tell them what's going on, who's what's what. And we're in this breakaway, 2K to go with the climb. I look at this guy, and he's like, he's built like me, so he's 80 plus kilos. I'm thinking, oh my word, I've got to try and keep Wasswa calm, but I know the wind's on here. So I said to him, right, you got a 2K climb to the finish line coming up. When you want to attack, just go for it. Whatever you do, you've just got to hold it for the line. Wasswa being Wasswa, within the first 50 meters of this slope, just goes, and I'm like, oh no, he's not gonna hold 400 watts for 5 minutes. Lo and behold, he does. You know, and I like, genuinely, I was nearly tears in my eyes. It still chokes me now. And I remember sending Ross. I try and film whenever we were getting like potentially a win, I'd be filming it, and I'm trying to video this whilst screaming at this guy. I think it ended up on Instagram.
It did, I remember that one really well.
I mean, there was all sorts of tones coming out of my throat. I sound like a 15-year-old schoolboy. It was just absolute chaos, but it was just everything coming together, all that energy and emotion at me and Ross, and so many people like Giro who'd put into that, from time, from money, from donations. That was the culmination of all that work coming together, and I think that's that release.
Absolutely, I think that's what's really important to get across, is that, like, we want to hear more of these stories, and the only way that you're able to do the work that you do, and these guys are able to kind of get the results they are getting. The raw talent has obviously got them, to the start line, so to speak, but it's the equipment, it's the kind of, this is just the modern world that we live in, It does require donations, and it does require support. So we'll put all the sort of links and descriptions in the bits below.
We've got a dedicated page on the website. We've got
a dedicated page on the website that makes it clear. I think what we will do, I really like this idea of maybe kind of doing, some gathering all these like spares and stuff. I think there's a lot that we could sort of support there, because monthly donations, I mean, look, as I say, it's £3 a month. That is nothing, and it's very easy to do. Or if you want to do any more
there's
than
a link on the page. I know that if you can.
A number of our customers already do so. But then if we were to kind of do something like in sort of spring, like later in spring, where we can kind of essentially have like an event here, we can basically just kind of get a load of stuff in, kind of a bunch of spares that we can sort of ship out to you. Or it could be anything, and look, if as a more kind of extreme thing, I know that Ross has done a call out for bikes in the past. So if people have got spare bikes that they'd be willing to part with, like, I mean, these are things that it has such an immeasurable impact, because it's not just that person who gets the bike, it's a knock-on effect that has in the community. And you've heard a million times here on this podcast, for us, our passion here is community. It's about the people that walk through the door, and the fact that our community can play a part in helping to support and kind of build and invest into the community that you're kind of nurturing is amazing. And that's really the story we want to get across. It's a real kind of like heart passion here. Sam, thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege talking to you, mate. I think what you're doing is amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us on. Appreciate it.
And as I say, we'll put all the sort of information below, but hopefully we get some
first ever in-person Masaka podcast as well, which is cool.
Everything's been on Zoom before because everyone's on the other side of the world.
So nice to be in person.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, nice one.